my fellow Americans, my friends, my family. I want to share a story with you, a testament to the fact that while blood may bind us, true family is forged in the fires of loyalty and courage. It began with a phone call, not the one you expect on a quiet Tuesday evening, but the kind that makes your stomach drop. My phone flashed a name I hadn't seen in 6 long years: Arthur Covington. My father. Not mom and dad, not home, just him. The man who had been a ghost in my life for as long as I could remember. My first instinct was to assume a wrong number, perhaps a hospital calling from a deceased man's phone. That, sadly, told me everything about our relationship. But no, the voice on the other end was too warm, too practiced. "Ava, my dear, how are you? Listen, Penelope and I were hoping you'd come home for dinner this Friday. She's making something special." Penelope, his new wife, an elegant woman barely a few years my senior. The whole thing felt like a scene from a poorly written drama. I didn't answer right away. The silence hung between us until he spoke again, his voice laced with a desperation that was completely foreign to me. It would mean the world to me. It's been too long. A normal daughter might have accepted, smiled through the awkwardness, and seen it as a chance to reconnect. But I was not a normal daughter. As a captain in the armed forces, I had stared down threats in hostile lands, survived missions where every second counted, and pushed my body to its absolute limit. Yet, the thought of a dinner with my father felt like the ultimate test of endurance, the kind you don't receive a medal for. I told him I'd think about it, and he sounded almost relieved, a man who believed rules applied to everyone except himself. I hung up, staring at my cold takeout, wondering if I was about to make the gravest mistake of my life. My father, Arthur Covington, could talk a sailor out of his last penny, but he could never sell a single ounce of honesty. My mother, rest her soul, spent years cleaning up his messes, covering his gambling debts, and trying to keep our family from fracturing. When she passed, when I was 20, I did the only thing I could. I joined the army and put as much distance between us as possible. I was Captain Ava Covington now, and I had faced down worse than a family dinner. I hoped. Friday came faster than I expected. I spent the day training my squad, shouting commands until my voice was raw, running drills that left me breathless. Around 5 p.m., I showered and changed into something civilian. A pair of dark jeans, a simple blouse, and sturdy boots. I needed to feel grounded, prepared. Driving down the familiar road, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, menacing shadows. I hadn't made this trip in years, and the closer I got, the more memories returned. The backyard where I learned to throw a perfect spiral, the kitchen where Mom baked cookies every Sunday, the driveway where Dad screamed at me for accidentally scratching his pristine convertible. Nostalgia and bitterness mixed in my gut like vinegar and water. Still, a gnawing curiosity pushed me forward. Why now? Why dinner? Arthur never did anything without a motive. If he was reaching out, it wasn't because he had a sudden change of heart, it meant he wanted something. And Penelope, I had heard whispers that she had been busy redecorating the house like she was on a reality show. She had the smile of a pageant queen and the eyes of someone always calculating. The thought of sitting across from her while she played the perfect hostess made me want to turn the car around and drive away forever. But I didn't. I needed to face them, to prove to myself that Arthur Covington no longer had a hold on me. When I pulled into the long driveway, my jaw tightened. The house was not the modest brick colonial I remembered. No, this place looked like it had been ripped from a magazine. Massive new windows, a fancy stone entryway, and landscaping that probably cost more than my entire retirement fund. The sudden opulence screamed a new level of desperation. Where was this money coming from? Certainly not his old job at the dealership. He had retired, so he claimed. Gambling winnings, please. Arthur losing money was as predictable as the sunrise. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, my stomach churning with that familiar mix of dread and adrenaline that I felt before a mission. The difference was, in the military, I trusted the people beside me. Here, I wasn't sure I could trust anyone inside that house. Not my father, not Penelope, and maybe not even myself for showing up in the first place. The front door opened before I could knock. Arthur stood there, grinning like he had just won the lottery.
Ava, there you are.
Come in, come in. His hair was grayer, his belly bigger, but his eyes still held that sparkle, the con man's sparkle. He hugged me tightly, too tightly, as if to convince both of us that this was a normal father-daughter reunion. Stiff as a board, I let him, forcing a strained smile in return. Inside, the house smelled of roasted garlic, butter, and money. New mahogany floors gleamed, and a crystal chandelier I definitely didn't remember cast a brilliant light. The walls were painted in colors that screamed expensive. Penelope floated into the room in a silk dress, her smile wide and unblinking. Ava, welcome home. We're so glad you came. She leaned in to kiss my cheek, her perfume overwhelming. I muttered a thank you and tried not to choke on the scent. Dinner was served in the dining room, laid out with crystal glasses, polished silverware, and flickering candles. It looked more like a lavish wedding reception than a casual family meal. My suspicion grew with every passing moment. Arthur pulled out a chair for me, all charm and politeness, the perfect host. Penelope poured wine, her manicured hands steady, her eyes studying me as if sizing up an opponent. I sat down, forced another smile, and told myself to breathe. Whatever this was, I was ready. The scrape of the chair legs against the mahogany floor made my skin crawl. The sound echoed in my head long after I sat down. My eyes flickered across the table, the candlelight casting a glow that felt more staged than intimate. Penelope smiled, perfectly poised, while Arthur poured himself a generous glass of wine with a steady hand that betrayed nothing. My military instincts screamed at me to catalog the room. 2 exits, windows locked, a half-open kitchen door, a knife block just within reach if things went sideways. I wasn't paranoid. Years of training had drilled it into me. You don't enter unfamiliar terrain without a plan, even if that terrain is your father's dining room. Arthur raised his glass toward me. To family, he said, his tone smooth, practiced. I could see the hunger in his eyes, the need for me to play along. I clinked my glass against his, took a cautious sip, and set it back down. The wine was expensive. Far too expensive. That was the first red flag. The second was how quickly Penelope refilled his glass without being asked. She moved like this was her stage, and we were her audience. Tell us about the army, Ava, Penelope chimed in, her voice syrupy sweet. Arthur says you've made captain. That must be such an honor. She tilted her head just enough to make it look like she cared. I gave a polite nod. It's work. It keeps me busy. It was the safest answer I could give. I wasn't about to unpack deployments, lost friends, or the fact that coming home to Virginia often felt like stepping into enemy territory. My father leaned forward, elbows on the table, a little too eager. Bussy is good, but come on, sweetheart. You've got to be set up nice now. Steady paycheck, good benefits. They take care of you, right? His words carried that edge I recognized as a probe disguised as small talk. I forced a smile and speared a piece of roasted asparagus. They take care of me well enough. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth he was fishing for either. I could feel his eyes on me, weighing every word. This man, who had gambled away nearly every chance he'd ever been given, was now trying to gauge how much the army might be worth to him. Same Arthur, just with a fancier backdrop. The food was good, too good. A perfectly cooked steak, garlic mashed potatoes whipped smooth, asparagus crisp but not overdone. Nothing about this meal said, casual family dinner. Everything screamed, performance, and performances have motives. My fork scraped against the plate, the sound sharp enough to cut the silence. Arthur jumped back in. You know, Ava, I've been thinking. Maybe it's time we reconnected, made things right between us. Life's too short to hold grudges, don't you think? Penelope nodded like a cheerleader, her eyes shining in a way that didn't match her words. It was all too much, too staged. I didn't trust a single second of it. I leaned back, crossing my arms without meaning to, a defensive posture I usually reserved for interrogation rooms. Arthur noticed. "What?" he said almost playfully, but his smile faltered at the edges. "Can't a man want to have dinner with his daughter?" I held his gaze. Steady and unflinching, sure. But you don't call out of the blue after 6 years just to ask about my health. So what's this really about? My words landed like a challenge. For a moment, I thought he would snap. Instead, he chuckled. That same hollow laugh that never reached his eyes. "You always were sharp. Must be the army training." Penelope reached across the table, lightly touching his wrist. "Arthur, relax. This is supposed to be a nice evening." Then she turned to me with that polished smile. "He's just happy to see you, Ava." "We both are." I didn't respond. I just kept chewing slowly, letting the silence stretch. If there's one thing you learn in uniform, it's how to weaponize silence. Eventually, Arthur filled it. "Look, I won't lie. Things haven't been easy. Retirement's expensive, and I know I haven't always been there for you. But maybe now we can start fresh. Maybe we can help each other." There it was. Not even 20 minutes into dinner, and the mask had slipped. I set my fork down deliberately, the sound of metal on porcelain sharper than it needed to be. "Help each other?" I repeated. My tone was flat, not a question. Not an agreement, just an echo, daring him to elaborate. He leaned back, spreading his hands like he was being open. "Family looks out for family. That's all I'm saying." His words had weight, unspoken meaning buried underneath. My stomach tightened. In my line of work, you don't ignore your gut. It had saved my life more times than I could count. The evening dragged on, a chess match disguised as small talk. Arthur asked about promotions, pensions, whether I'd considered buying property. Penelope sprinkled in compliments that were little more than veiled digs. I parried every question, answering just enough to keep them from pressing harder. But inside, every alarm bell was blaring. The house, the food, the sudden warmth. It was all too perfect. Perfect usually means planned, and planned usually means dangerous. At one point, Arthur raised his glass again, his eyes locked on mine. "I'm proud of you, Ava. You've done well. Better than I ever thought you would." The compliment sounded hollow, rehearsed. I nodded but didn't thank him. I didn't owe him that. Penelope laughed lightly, trying to fill the air. "He means it. He talks about you all the time." The idea of Arthur praising me behind my back was laughable. This man once told me I'd never make it past basic training. If he was proud now, it was only because he thought he could profit from it. As dessert came out, a homemade tiramisu, picture perfect, I felt the weight of the evening pressing harder. My father's words, Penelope's stares, the opulence of the house, it was all circling the same point: they wanted something. The question wasn't if, but what. And as I pushed the plate slightly away, pretending I was too full, I realized I'd walked straight into a scenario that felt less like a family dinner and more like a mission brief I hadn't been prepared for. The buzz of my phone cut through the thick silence, vibrating against the wood of the dining table. All three of us glanced at it at the same time. I slid the phone closer, tilting it so the screen faced only me. One new message. "Get up and go. Don't say anything to him." The words hit me harder than any ambush ever had. My eyes flicked toward the kitchen door, then back to my father. He was busy topping off his glass again, oblivious, or pretending to be. Penelope watched me carefully, her manicured nails drumming lightly against the edge of her plate. Whoever sent that text knew something, and knew it urgently enough to risk breaking the surface of this staged dinner. I locked the screen without a word and slipped the phone under my napkin. My training kicked in instantly. Keep your face neutral, your breathing steady. Never let them see the shift. Arthur leaned forward, his voice a little too eager. "Everything okay?" "Work," I lied smoothly. "It never leaves me alone." He laughed, shaking his head. "That's the army for you. Always on call." Penelope chuckled too, though hers sounded brittle, like glass about to crack. Inside, my mind was running at combat speed. Who had my number? Who would know to warn me? And what exactly was I supposed to be walking away from? Poison? A setup? Some scheme about to be laid on the table? Every scenario stacked on top of the other until my stomach knotted. My phone buzzed again, quieter this time. I glanced down while pretending to reach for my glass. Another message? Kitchen now? I didn't react outwardly. Arthur was busy spearing another piece of steak, his knife scraping the plate. Penelope fussed with the candles again. My heart thudded once hard, but my face stayed calm. Whoever was in that kitchen wanted me out of this room, and fast. "Excuse me," I said evenly, laying my napkin on the table. "Restroom." Neither of them protested. Arthur grunted, waving me off with his fork. Penelope gave me a polite smile. Down the hall, first door, 0. I pushed my chair back slowly, standing without a sound. My boots sank into the plush carpet as I crossed the dining room, every sense alert. The kitchen door was still half open, the smell of roasted garlic and coffee lingering. I slipped through it quietly, my body tense like I was clearing a room overseas. The kitchen was dim, lit only by the soft glow of under-cabinet lights. And there she was, Eleanor, the housekeeper I barely remembered from years ago. Her hands shook as she gripped a dish towel, her face pale but determined. "Captain Covington," she whispered urgently, using my title like it was a lifeline. "You can't stay here. They're trying to set you up. Arthur owes money he can't pay. He and that woman, Penelope, they think you're their way out." Her words hit me like a round to the chest. The phone, the folder, the forced smiles, it all snapped into focus. I stepped closer, keeping my voice low. "How do you know?" Her eyes darted toward the dining room. "I hear everything. He's desperate, Ava. They've been planning this dinner for weeks. It's not about family. It's about what you have, what they think they can take. Penelope's been pushing him, whispering that you're the answer. He's drowning in debt, and they've got people after them. Dangerous people." The air seemed to grow colder suddenly. "What's in the folder?" I asked. "Papers, power of attorney. Financial documents. They want you to sign something. Make it look clean." Arthur's been practicing what to say. Penelope is the one who wrote it all up. She's smarter than him. Meaner, too. My jaw tightened. Power of attorney. The kind of move that would strip me of control faster than any ambush. My own father trying to rope me into his last-ditch escape plan. Eleanor grabbed my arm suddenly, her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't drink the wine. I saw Penelope in the kitchen earlier. She poured something into your glass." The words turned my stomach. I thought back to the bitter note in the first sip, the way Penelope refilled my glass without asking. My chest burned with a cold, sharp anger. "Thank you," I said firmly, steadying her. "Stay quiet. I'll handle this." Her eyes glistened, relief mixed with terror. She nodded and stepped back, retreating into the shadows of the kitchen. I straightened my jacket, rolled my shoulders, and walked back toward the dining room, my steps steady and deliberate. Whatever game Arthur and Penelope thought they were playing, they weren't ready for me to know the rules. The door creaked softly as I pushed it open. Their eyes snapped toward me. Arthur raised his glass again, smiling wide. Penelope's hand lingered on the folder, poised, ready. I sat down, calm and composed, my untouched glass of wine glinting in the candlelight like a loaded gun. I pushed the glass away slowly, deliberately, and picked up my water instead. Arthur's brow twitched, but he covered it with a laugh. "Still pacing yourself, huh? Same old Eva. Hydration keeps me sharp," I said evenly, meeting his eyes. "You'd be surprised how many people forget that." Penelope let out a soft giggle, but there was a strain behind it. Her gaze darted to Arthur, then back to me. "Well, we just wanted tonight to be special. Arthur has something he's been meaning to share." She patted the folder like it was a sleeping child. I leaned back, arms crossed, waiting. No rush. They shifted in their chairs like school kids caught in a lie. Finally, Arthur cleared his throat and reached for the folder. "Here we are, just some standard stuff, nothing complicated. Thought it'd be good for us to make things official." I sat slowly, my gaze sweeping over the documents. Pages dense with legal jargon, neatly tabbed and highlighted. Penelope had been meticulous. I scanned the header durable power of attorney. My chest tightened, though my face didn't betray it. Arthur tapped the pen eagerly. All it takes is a signature. Then we're set? Family united? United? I repeated softly, my eyes locking with his. He didn't notice the edge in my tone, but Penelope did. Her smile froze just a little. I picked up the pen, turning it between my fingers, studying the weight. My training screamed at me, control the room. Control the pace. This is a big step. I said evenly. Did a lawyer prepare these? Penelope jumped in too quickly. Yes, a friend. Very reputable. It's just standard paperwork. I arched an eyebrow. Standard paperwork that hands over my financial authority. Arthur shifted uncomfortably, his charm slipping. It's just to make things easier for all of us. In case anything happens. Families do this all the time. My pen clicked softly against the table. Once, twice. The sound filled the silence like a metronome. Penelope's knuckles whitened on the edge of the folder. I laid the pen down deliberately. If you wanted my trust, you should have earned it, not poisoned it. Arthur blinked confused. Penelope's eyes went sharp as knives, but her mouth stayed in that fixed smile. What do you mean by that? He finally asked, his voice rough. I mean, you invited me here under the pretense of family, and what I got was paperwork designed to strip me of everything I've earned. On top of that, you served me a poisoned drink. The words landed like a grenade. Arthur's face froze pale, draining beneath his tan. Penelope didn't flinch. Her eyes, locked on mine, were sharp and calculating. That's a ridiculous accusation, she said smoothly, her voice dripping with manufactured disbelief. Why would we ever hurt you? I leaned forward, my voice calm and low, because desperation makes people reckless. Arthur's debts are drowning him, and you think my career, my benefits, my name can buy you out of it. Arthur's hands shook as he slammed the folder shut. That's not true, he barked, but his voice cracked on the last word. Penelope reached across, placing her hand over his, squeezing as though to anchor him. Sarah, we wanted to protect you. I cut her off. My patience was gone. If anything ever happened, you'd be cashing out before my body hit the ground. The air in the room turned heavy. Arthur's mouth worked, but no sound came out. Penelope, though, just tilted her head, the mask slipping for the briefest second. What I saw in her eyes wasn't hurt or shock. It was calculation, weighing whether to pivot or double down. I let my hand drift to my phone under the table, fingers brushing the screen. My training screamed at me, control. Secure the threat, call it in. But another voice, the personal one, the voice of a daughter, whispered, this is your father. If you call 911, you're ending what's left of that bond. The weight of it pressed down harder than the body armor I wore overseas. Arthur finally spoke, his voice cracking. Ava, please. I didn't want this. Penelope snapped her head toward him, her eyes flashing. Shut up, Arthur. You never know when to stop talking. That single command shattered whatever illusion was left. She was the engine, the mastermind. Arthur wasn't a father reaching out for reconciliation. He was a pawn, too. I pressed the phone harder in my hand, my thumb hovering over the emergency call button. My pulse thundered in my ears. One call and this whole charade would end with flashing lights outside and handcuffs inside. But it wasn't that simple. Calling too soon without evidence meant Penelope could spin it, twist it into hysteria. Arthur could back her up. I'd look like the paranoid soldier daughter who snapped at dinner. I needed to decide, expose them now or play along until I had enough to bury them for good. Arthur's voice broke through again, desperate. Ava, you know me. You know I wouldn't hurt you. I turned to him, my tone steady, cold. I used to know you. The man who taught me to ride a bike, who showed me how to fix a flat tire. That man wouldn't be sitting here with poison in my glass and forged papers on the table. His face crumpled, shame and fear mixing. He opened his mouth, but Penelope tightened her grip on his hand until his knuckles went white. She leaned toward me, her voice like steel now. You're overreacting. You've been in the army too long. You see enemies everywhere. We just wanted what's fair. Fair? The word twisted in my chest like a blade. I bit back the urge to laugh. Nothing about this was fair. My thumb pressed against the phone screen, sliding to the emergency dial. The numbers glowed faintly under the table. 911. All I had to do was hit call. My breath caught in my throat as Arthur finally saw what I was doing. His eyes went wide. No, he whispered hoarsely, shaking his head. Please, Ava, don't. Penelope's expression didn't change. Her gaze locked on me like a predator, steady, unflinching. She didn't beg. She didn't flinch. She calculated. I looked between them, the father who had already betrayed me, and the woman who had orchestrated the whole thing. The silence stretched long, the weight of my decision pressing down with every tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. And then I pressed the button. The faint tone confirmed the call, the dispatcher's calm voice crackling in my ear. 911, what's your emergency? I didn't blink. My voice was clear, firm, practiced. This is Captain Ava Covington. I'm at 27 Greenwood Drive. Possible attempted poisoning. Fraud in progress. I need units dispatched immediately. The words landed in the room like a gavel slamming down. Arthur's face collapsed, his shoulders sagging as if the fight drained out of him completely. Penelope, though, didn't move. She just sat there, eyes locked on mine, her smile gone but her resolve unbroken. The dispatcher's voice was calm, steady. Units are on their way. Stay on the line if you can. I'll hold, I said, my eyes never leaving Penelope's. Arthur slumped into his chair, his breathing ragged, muttering something under his breath that sounded like apology or excuse. Penelope stayed poised, composed, her hand resting on the folder like it was still her winning card. But for the first time all night, the control was mine. The faint static of the dispatcher's line hummed in my ear as I set the phone flat on my lap, screen down, but still connected. I angled my body so Arthur and Penelope couldn't see it. The operator's calm voice blended into the background like white noise while I fixed my focus on the table again. Arthur had slumped, his hands shaking as he rubbed his temples. He looked like a man already halfway defeated. Penelope was the opposite, rigid, still, her hands steady on the leather folder. She hadn't blinked since the word, poison, left my mouth. I reached for my fork, stabbing a piece of steak as if the evening hadn't shattered. I chewed slowly, deliberately, keeping my eyes on Arthur. You look tired, I said, my tone casual, almost conversational. This can't be easy for you. His eyes flicked up to mine, watery and pleading. Ava, I never wanted it like this, he said. Penelope cut him off instantly. Arthur, just his name, but sharp enough to slice through the air. He froze like a child scolded at the dinner table. I washed down the bite with water, ignoring the untouched wineglass glinting beside me. Every nerve in me was alive, sharp, aware. The tension was the same as a combat zone. Eyes on the threat, body ready to move, mind 3 steps ahead. I leaned back slightly, letting my gaze slide to Penelope. You should have done your homework. I've spent my whole career reading people who lie for a living. You're good, but you're not that good. For the first time, her smile faltered. Just a flicker, a hairline crack. Then she smoothed it over, tilting her head as if amused. And yet here you are, sitting at our table, eating our food. I smirked, just enough to needle her. Not drinking your wine, though. Arthur groaned, burying his face in his hands. Penelope stayed still, her eyes narrowing. The silence stretched again until the sound of the grandfather clock filled it, steady and relentless. Tick, tock, each second pulling the police closer to the front door. The dispatcher's faint voice broke in again, muffled from the phone hidden on my lap. Units are 1 minute out. I nodded once, subtly, to myself. Penelope caught it, her brows pulling together. She knew something had shifted but couldn't place it. I set my fork down gently and leaned forward, elbows on the table like I was finally giving in. All right, I said slowly. Let's see these papers. Arthur looked up, startled hope flashing in his eyes. He fumbled for the folder, flipping it open again with shaking hands. Penelope straightened, poised, sliding the top page toward me like she was presenting a royal decree. Good, she said smoothly. This is what's best for all of us. Just sign here and the rest will fall into place. I dragged the folder closer, my eyes scanning the fine print again. Durable power of attorney, sweeping clauses. My entire financial and medical authority transferred to Arthur. Not a loophole left. Penelope had done her homework on paper, if not on me. I picked up the pen, rolling it in my fingers, letting the silence stretch. Arthur leaned forward, eager, desperate. Penelope stayed perfectly still, her gaze locked on me. Funny, I said lightly. How something so dangerous can look so official. Penelope's jaw tightened. Arthur blinked, confused. What do you mean? I tapped the pen against the paper once. This is a weapon, just not the kind that leaves bruises. The room went silent again, broken only by the distinct sound of tires crunching gravel outside. My ears picked it up instantly. So did Penelope. Her head snapped toward the window, her eyes narrowing. Arthur stayed oblivious, still staring at the paper. Ava, Penelope said slowly, suspicion creeping into her tone. What did you do? I leaned back, dropping the pen onto the folder with a casual clatter. I did what any soldier does when threatened. I called for backup. Her eyes widened for the first time all night, her composure cracking. Arthur's head jerked toward me, panic flooding his face. No, Iva, you didn't. The sound of footsteps approached the porch, firm and deliberate. Knuckles rapped against the heavy front door, loud, authoritative. Police, open up, a voice barked. The color drained from Arthur's face. Penelope sat frozen, her nails digging into the leather of the folder. I rose calmly from my chair, every movement deliberate, controlled. The dispatcher's voice still hummed faintly on the line in my lap. I slid the phone onto the table, screen up now. The open call glaring at them like a mirror of their failure. Evening's over, I said quietly, my gaze locked on Penelope's. The door rattled again with a sharper knock. Open up? Arthur jolted to his feet, panicked like a trapped animal. Penelope didn't move. She just stared at me, her face pale, but her eyes still burning with cold defiance. I walked to the door, each step steady, controlled. My hand closed around the brass handle as Arthur muttered behind me, pleading half words that meant nothing. When I pulled the door open, the night air rushed in, cool and sharp. 2 officers stood on the porch, hands resting near their holsters, eyes scanning immediately past me into the house. Their presence filled the doorway like a wall. Captain Covington. One of them asked firmly. Yes, I answered clearly. They're inside. Behind me, Arthur let out a broken sob. Penelope finally moved, her chair scraping sharply against the floor. The officers stepped past me, their boots heavy on the marble entryway. I closed the door behind them, the click echoing through the house. At that moment, the game was no longer Arthur's or Penelope's. It was mine. The 2 officers fanned into the dining room, their flashlights cutting across polished wood and expensive art. Arthur dropped back into his chair, his breathing uneven, hands clutching the edge of the table. Penelope, on the other hand, straightened, her face sliding seamlessly back into its polished mask. Good evening, she said smoothly, rising to her feet with practiced grace. There must be some mistake. We were just finishing dinner with family. Her voice was calm, almost soothing. But I caught the twitch in her fingers where they clutched the folder. The same folder that told the real story. The taller officer, badge glinting under the chandelier, glanced between us. We received a call about a possible poisoning. Who placed the call? I lifted my hand. I did. Captain Ava Covington. The wine served to me was tampered with. Penelope let out a soft, incredulous laugh, shaking her head as though I'd accused her of serving undercooked chicken instead of attempted murder. Tampered. That's absurd. Ava has been under a lot of stress. You know how military service can affect perception? It was a clever angle. Paint me as the paranoid soldier daughter seeing ghosts in every shadow. If I hadn't already dealt with diplomats who lied smoother than silk, maybe it would have worked. The officer turned to me. Ma'am, do you have evidence of this claim? My eyes slid deliberately to the untouched wine glass still sitting inches from my plate, the surface shimmering under the chandelier. Right there, I said firmly. Test it. I didn't touch it after the first sip. You'll find what you need. Penelope's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before snapping back into place. She pushed the glass away. Yes, but doesn't that tell you she's imagining things? Who tastes poison and then walks away perfectly fine? Because it was only a trace, I shot back. Enough to make me sick, not dead, not yet. Slow acting that way, by the time anyone suspected. The papers in that folder would already be signed. Arthur's head dropped into his hands with a groan, his shoulders shaking. Papers? The shorter officer asked, stepping closer. I pointed. Durable power of attorney, giving them control of my finances, my benefits, my estate. Penelope drafted it. Arthur pushed it. They planned to lock me in legally before the poison did its work. The officer reached for the folder. Penelope's hand tightened around it like a vice. That's private, she snapped. Family matters, not police business. Her polished tones slipped for just a second, steel creeping through. The officer didn't flinch. He pulled the folder from her grip, flipping through the pages. His brows furrowed as he skimmed the contents. This isn't standard. These clauses. He looked up sharply. This would give you unrestricted access to her assets. Arthur groaned louder, his head dropping lower. Penelope's mask cracked again, just for a flash. Ma'am, the taller officer said firmly, we'll need you both to remain seated while we continue. Penelope didn't sit. With all due respect, officer, I think Ava is exploiting her status. She wants control of the narrative. Look at my husband. Does he look like a criminal mastermind? The irony nearly made me laugh. Arthur couldn't mastermind his way out of a paper bag, but that was the point she had. I leaned forward, my voice steady, cold. The mastermind is you, Penelope. You're the one who knew the paperwork, who mixed the drink, who drove him deeper into this hole. Arthur's a coward, yes, but you're the one who sharpened the knife. Arthur whimpered, half sobbing. I didn't know. I didn't want it like this. The officers exchanged a look. They'd seen this dynamic before. Weak husband, domineering partner. They didn't need me to spell it out. But Penelope wasn't done. She finally sat, folding her hands neatly on the table like she was back in control. Her eyes locked on mine. Ava, you always were dramatic. Even as a child, everything was life or death. Maybe the army only made it worse. I forced a calm smile. Funny, in my world, life or death isn't drama, it's reality, and right now, yours is unfolding. Her lips pressed into a line. Arthur let out another strangled sob. The taller officer straightened. Mom, sir, you'll need to remain here while detectives are dispatched. If there's poison, forensics will confirm. If there's fraud, this paperwork is evidence. Until then, no one leaves. The tension shifted like a storm front moving in. Penelope's eyes narrowed, her nails digging into her palms. Arthur stayed hunched, a picture of defeat. The clock ticked on, loud and steady, each second dragging them closer to collapse. I sat back, calm, composed. Inside, my pulse still thundered. But the battlefield was mine now. I could feel it. The way Penelope's calm was fraying at the edges, the way Arthur's nerves had already snapped. This wasn't about survival anymore. This was about patience, holding steady while the walls closed in. The shorter officer glanced at the wine glass again, then at Penelope. Funny thing, he said casually. People who have nothing to hide don't usually fight this hard to keep us from testing a drink. Penelope's mouth opened, then shut, no words coming. The silence spoke louder than anything. The grandfather clock chimed the half hour, the sound echoing through the tense room. No one moved. Not Arthur, not Penelope, not me. Only the officers, steady, watchful, waiting. And in that moment, I knew the trap they set for me had become theirs. The sound of another set of boots echoed through the front hall, heavier, slower, the kind of measured pace that meant rank. 2 detectives stepped in, plain clothes, but with unmistakable authority. One carried a slim evidence kit, the other a notepad already flipped open. Penelope straightened instantly, her eyes sharp, scanning them like she was recalculating her next move. Arthur barely lifted his head. The taller detective introduced himself. Detective Harris, Fairfax County. This is Detective Nolan. We're here to follow up on the reported poisoning and fraud. His voice carried the weight of routine, the kind that said he'd seen hundreds of lies before breakfast. He glanced around the room, his eyes landing on the wine glass. That it? The shorter officer nodded. Yes, sir, untouched after the first sip. She says it was tampered with. Detective Nolan moved quickly, snapping on latex gloves and pulling out a small dropper kit. He swabbed the rim, the liquid inside, slipping samples into sealed vials with practiced efficiency. Penelope's eyes followed every movement. Her lips pressed so tight they almost disappeared. Detective Harris turned his attention to the folder. And this is the paperwork. The officer holding it nodded. Before he could hand it over, Penelope's voice rang out, smooth, controlled, and rehearsed. Yes, that's ours, she said quickly. Please, let me explain. My husband and I were only trying to prepare for the future. Ava misunderstood. You know how emotions can run high in families. Her hands folded neatly in front of her. Her voice carried just enough warmth to sound sincere but not desperate. She was pivoting hard, trying to frame the narrative before the detectives had a chance to dig. Detective Harris didn't buy it. He gestured and the officer passed the folder over. Penelope's eyes tracked it like a predator watching prey slip away. As Harris flipped through the documents, Penelope's voice sharpened. Those are private legal matters. You can't just… Mom, Harris cut her off, his tone firm but even. When there's suspicion of fraud tied to a potential felony, these stop being private. Her jaw clenched, but she forced another smile. You're misunderstanding. I drafted those with an attorney. Perfectly legal. Maybe, Harris said, not looking up. But this clause here, this isn't standard, and neither is this one. This isn't protection. This is control. Arthur groaned again, burying his face in his hands. I didn't want it, he muttered, his voice breaking. She said it was the only way. Penelope snapped her head toward him, eyes blazing.
Arthur, enough!
The room froze. Arthur shrank back into his chair, mumbling incoherently. I leaned forward, my voice calm, cutting through. You don't need to take my word for it. Every line in that folder is self-serving. Every sip from that glass proves intent. Penelope's eyes locked on mine, hatred burning through her polished mask. Then she did something none of us expected. She reached out, snatched the folder from the detective's hands, and pressed it flat on the table. Fine, she snapped, her composure cracking. Read it. Take it. It doesn't matter. Arthur signed already. The words hit the room like a gunshot. Arthur's head jerked up, eyes wide. What? He croaked, confused. I didn't. You did? She spat, her voice sharp, desperate now. You signed when we went to the notary last week. Don't you dare back out now. Arthur's face crumpled as he shook his head wildly. I thought it was something else. You said it was just a will. You lied to me. Detective Harris seized the folder back, flipping rapidly through the pages. He pulled one out and held it up. Arthur's messy scrawl sat at the bottom. Notarized and dated, Harris's brow furrowed. Looks like he did sign something, but if he was misled about what he was signing, that's fraud? Penelope's eyes darted around, searching for a foothold. Her polished mask was gone now, stripped down to the raw edge of panic. She tried to laugh it off, but the sound came brittle, unsteady. Fraud, please. Families make arrangements all the time. Ava's exaggerating. Arthur is confused. You can't prove intent. Detective Nolan, still carefully sealing the wine sample, spoke up for the first time. If this glass comes back positive, intent will prove itself. The silence that followed was suffocating. Penelope's breathing quickened, shallow, her fingers tapping against the table like a tell. Arthur sat limp, his eyes red and wet, whispering apologies to no one in particular. I kept my voice even and level. You wanted me silenced. Instead, you gave me evidence. Penelope's eyes flicked back to me, her composure teetering on collapse. You think you've won, Iva? You think this makes you the hero? I leaned forward, my voice steady, quiet enough that only she could hear. It makes me alive. For the first time, She looked truly shaken. The detectives stepped back, folder secure, glass sealed, and the room heavy with the weight of what had just shifted. The dinner table, once staged as their battleground, was no longer theirs. The detectives had barely finished bagging the wine glass when the sound of soft footsteps came from the hallway. Every head turned. Eleanor, the housekeeper, hovered in the doorway with her apron still tied around her waist. Her hands nervously wrung a dish towel. For a second, she looked like she might retreat into the shadows like she'd done for years. But instead, she stepped forward, her chin trembling but held high. "Officers," she said, her voice thin but steady. "I know things about them, about tonight." Penelope shot up from her chair, fury twisting her features. "Eleanor." "Don't you dare!" Detective Harris raised a hand, silencing her. "Mum, sit down. Let her speak." Eleanor swallowed hard, her eyes never leaving Penelope's. "She told me to pour the wine. She said to make sure Ava's glass was filled to the top. When I asked why, she smiled and said, 'Because it's her last.'" The words hit harder than any physical blow. Arthur groaned, covering his face with both hands. Penelope's face twisted, her control fracturing further. "Lies," she hissed. But the room knew better. Detective Nolan's pen scratched rapidly across his notepad. "Can you repeat that clearly for the record?" Eleanor nodded, her voice trembling but growing stronger. "She told me the wine was special. She said Arthur would finally be free of his debt once Ava was gone. She said Ava was too stubborn to sign without persuasion." The silence in the room was deafening. Penelope's breath came fast and shallow now. Arthur whispered a broken, "Oh God," under his breath. Detective Harris leaned in. "Eleanor, have you seen anything else? Any threats? Any documents?" Eleanor's eyes flicked to the folder on the table. "Yes, I saw her typing it up. She made Arthur practice what to say. And she warned me if I told anyone, I'd be the one out on the street." The officers exchanged a glance. Eleanor had just stitched the whole scheme together. Poison, fraud, coercion. The dam had cracked wide open. I turned my gaze back to Penelope, watching her carefully. Her lips moved silently, words she didn't dare speak aloud. Fury, calculation, desperation. She looked like a gambler staring at the last card in her hand. "Eleanor," I said softly, "you didn't have to do this, but you did. That takes guts." Penelope snapped, her voice like glass shattering. "She's a liar! She's been stealing from us for years! She's bitter! She wants revenge!" Eleanor flinched, but held her ground. "I've served this family for 15 years, I've seen everything, and I'm done keeping quiet." Detective Nolan stepped closer to Eleanor, his tone professional. "Mom, we'll need a full statement from you tonight. We'll also ask you to sign it officially. Are you willing?" Eleanor nodded firmly. "Yes, I'll tell everything." Penelope's composure fully cracked then. She lunged forward, her voice shrill, venomous. "You ungrateful witch! After everything I've done for you!" The officers moved instantly, blocking her path, their hands firm but calm as they pressed her back into her chair. Arthur sat frozen, mumbling incoherently, his tears soaking his palms. Detective Harris's voice was sharp now. "That's enough. You've both said plenty tonight." Penelope's chest heaved, her eyes wild, but she didn't fight further. She just sat there seething, her glare locked on Eleanor like daggers. Eleanor's voice wavered again as she turned to the detectives. She told Arthur that Ava's army benefits could cover everything, that once Ava was gone, they'd never have to worry again. She even bragged that the paperwork would look so legitimate no one would question it. Arthur whimpered, shaking his head. I didn't know she meant that. I thought it was just planning. Just planning." Eleanor's eyes hardened. "You knew enough?" The detectives had heard enough, too. Harris tucked the folder into a secure bag. Nolan sealed the vials, marking them carefully. The officers flanked Arthur and Penelope, their body language no longer tentative. The balance of power had shifted completely. Penelope, sensing it, made one last attempt. Her voice turned silky again, desperate for a lifeline. "Detective, this is all a misunderstanding. Family fights turn ugly. People say things they don't mean, Let us sort this out privately. Ava's exaggerating. Eleanor's bitter. Arthur's confused. None of this will stand in court. Harris's eyes were flat, unreadable. That's for a judge to decide. Tonight, you're both coming with us? The words landed heavy. Arthur's body sagged like he'd been shot. All the fight gone. Penelope still held her chin high, but her hands trembled against the polished table. Eleanor exhaled, a shaky sound that seemed to release 15 years of silence. She looked at me, and for the first time that night, her eyes weren't just fearful, they were steady, defiant. I gave her the smallest nod. She'd chosen her side, and it wasn't theirs. Detective Nolan closed his notebook with a firm snap. We're done here. Officers, please escort Mr. and Mrs. Covington to the car. The officers stepped in, guiding Arthur and Penelope to their feet. Arthur shuffled, broken, his sobs quiet now, but constant. Penelope walked stiffly, every step radiating fury, her eyes burning holes through everyone in the room. As they were led away, the house felt lighter, as though the weight pressing down on its walls had finally lifted. Eleanor stood straighter, her hands no longer wringing, her chin no longer trembling. Detective Harris turned to me. Captain Covington, we'll need your full statement as well, but for now, you're safe. Safe. The word didn't feel real yet. My pulse was still racing, my body still tense, but I nodded. The front door shut firmly behind Arthur and Penelope, the sound echoing through the house like a closing chapter. Only this time, it wasn't my chapter ending, it was theirs. The slam of the front door still echoed in the halls when the house finally went quiet. No shouting, no frantic denials, no muffled sobs, just silence. A silence so heavy it pressed against my chest harder than the chaos ever did. I stood by the dining table, staring at the untouched glass of wine. The surface still shimmered under the chandelier, like it was mocking me. That single glass had almost been the end of me, and the two people who wanted me gone were my own father and his wife. Eleanor lingered in the doorway, her hands twisting her apron. She looked smaller without the constant scurrying that usually filled her day. When our eyes met, she spoke softly. You all right, Captain? I'm standing, I said, my voice rough. That's enough for tonight. The Detective Harris cleared his throat, stepping closer. We'll process the paperwork and the toxicology report. The DA will have no shortage of charges. Attempted murder, fraud, coercion. Your father and his wife are looking at serious time. My stomach twisted at the word, father. It felt wrong, dirty, like the title didn't belong to him anymore. Do whatever you have to, I said quietly. He nodded and signaled his partner to gather the evidence bags. Then the detectives left, their footsteps fading, the cruiser doors slamming outside. When the flashing lights finally disappeared down the driveway, I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. My knees almost buckled. Eleanor crossed the room quickly, steadying me with surprising strength for her small frame. Easy now, she murmured. It's over, I shook my head. No, it's not. The cops might have them, but it's not over. Because how could it be over when the people who should have protected me tried to bury me instead? Eleanor guided me into one of the chairs, the same one I'd nearly been poisoned in. I gritted my teeth, staring at the deep scratches Penelope's nails had left in the wood, a perfect scar of her fury. You saved my life tonight, I said to Eleanor. Her eyes glistened. You saved yourself, Captain. I just pushed the truth where it needed to go. The words settled heavy between us. She had risked her livelihood, maybe even her safety, by speaking up. For years, she'd kept their secrets in silence, and tonight she chose to break it. You're braver than most soldiers I've served with, I said honestly. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, but her eyes were sad. Bravery is easier when you've got nothing left to lose. The clock in the corner ticked steadily, each second cutting into the night. I rubbed my temples, the pounding in my skull matching the rhythm. You should rest, Eleanor said gently. Rest? The word felt like a joke. How do you rest when your own blood had plotted to erase you? I closed my eyes, but all I saw was Arthur's face, his head in his hands, his sobs, his useless denials. He hadn't fought for me, not once. The betrayal cut deeper than the poison ever could. I forced my eyes open, fixing them on Eleanor. Why did he do it? He's my father. Why? Her shoulders lifted in a weary shrug. Debt makes people desperate. And Penelope, she knew how to pull his strings. She dangled freedom in front of him. He grabbed it, even if it meant losing you. The explanation made sense, but it didn't soothe the ache. Knowing why didn't erase the what. The house felt colder as the night dragged on. The air conditioning hummed, the refrigerator clicked, but it all sounded hollow. I could still hear Arthur's voice in my head, the pathetic whimpering. The man who'd raised me, the man who taught me how to ride a bike, had handed me over for the price of his debts. Eleanor busied herself in the kitchen, probably to give me space. But I heard her movements, clinking cups, running water, the scrape of a chair. Simple, grounding noises. I pushed back from the table and walked toward the hallway. Every picture frame on the wall caught my eye. Family photos, vacations, birthdays, smiles that now looked like lies. Penelope's hand on Arthur's arm, my younger self caught awkwardly in the corner, never the center. I ripped one frame off the wall without thinking. The glass cracked under my grip. I stared at the photo inside, me at 12, awkward braces and all, standing between them. Arthur smiling, Penelope perfect as always, none of it real. I dropped it into the trash bin by the door. Eleanor returned, her hands carrying 2 mugs of tea. She froze when she saw the empty spot on the wall, then looked at me. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. She just handed me a mug. The warmth seeped into my fingers, but not my chest. That part stayed frozen. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I asked, almost whispering, "Do you think he'll ever realize what he did?" Eleanor's eyes were steady. "Does it matter?" I sipped the tea, bitter and hot, and let her words sink in. Maybe she was right. Maybe closure wasn't about Arthur admitting his sins. Maybe it was about me facing the truth and walking forward anyway. But the pain lingered, not the sharp pain of betrayal anymore, but the dull ache of loss. Not losing a father tonight, I realized. I had lost him a long time ago. Tonight only proved it. I sat there until the tea went cold, until the clock struck midnight, until my body finally slumped from exhaustion. Eleanor covered me with a blanket where I sat, her movements gentle, almost maternal. For the first time in years, I let someone else take care of me, if only for a moment. The house was quiet again, but this time the silence wasn't heavy. It was just empty. And maybe empty was better than poisoned. Morning sunlight streamed through the curtains, harsher than I expected. My eyes burned, my body stiff from sleeping upright in the dining chair. Eleanor was already in the kitchen, moving quietly, as though the house itself was still in mourning. The knock on the door came sharp and early. 2 deputies stood outside, papers in hand. "Captain Covington, court summons. You're required to appear as a primary witness in the state of Virginia vs. Arthur and Penelope Covington." The words carried a weight heavier than any uniform I'd ever worn. I accepted the envelope, my name printed neatly across the front, and felt the knot tighten in my chest. Eleanor hovered nearby. "It begins, doesn't it?" I nodded, sliding the unopened envelope onto the table. "Yeah, it begins." Weeks blurred into one another as the investigation unfolded. Detectives pulled every bank record, every email, every shred of evidence that painted the picture of desperation and greed. Penelope had been the architect, weaving lies and debts into a web Arthur stumbled right into. He hadn't just followed, he'd signed documents, attended meetings, given consent. He wasn't a bystander, he was her accomplice. When the trial date arrived, I found myself walking into the Fairfax County Courthouse. My uniform crisp, medals aligned, hair pulled back so tight it felt like armor. The courthouse smelled of old wood polish and nerves. Inside the courtroom, Arthur sat at the defense table, his suit wrinkled, his shoulders hunched. He looked older, smaller, like the walls had already closed in on him. Penelope, on the other hand, sat upright, every strand of hair in place, her lips painted like war paint. She whispered fiercely to her attorney, her eyes darting toward me with a venomous gleam. The bailiff called the room to order, and the judge entered, his robe swaying. Proceedings began: jury selection, opening statements, the careful unwrapping of evidence. The prosecution laid it out plainly. Arthur and Penelope plotted to poison me, to coerce signatures on financial documents, to siphon my army benefits and wipe away Arthur's gambling debts. They had motive, opportunity, and a clear attempt caught in Penelope's own words. The defense fought back, painting me as paranoid, Eleanor as vengeful, the detectives as overzealous. They said Arthur was confused, manipulated, a weak man trapped by a domineering younger wife. Penelope was portrayed as a misunderstood spouse, a victim of circumstance. When my name was called to the stand, I rose without hesitation. The courtroom watched as I swore the oath, my hands steady, my voice clear. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Lisa Hanley, approached first. "Captain Covington, can you describe the evening of the 12th of June in your father's home?" So I did. Every detail. The invitation, the unease, the forced dinner conversation, the bitter tang of the wine, the text message warning me to get up and leave. I spoke of Eleanor's courage, of the detectives arriving, of Penelope's attempt to maintain control until the evidence tore it away. Lisa nodded as I finished. "And in your view, was there any doubt about their intent?" "None," I said, my voice firm. "They wanted me gone, and they nearly succeeded." The defense attorney stood next, a man with slicked back hair and too much cologne. His smile was practiced, his tone patronizing. "Captain, isn't it true you've been trained to suspect threats in your line of work? Combat deployments, constant vigilance. Isn't it possible you misinterpreted an innocent family dinner?" The jury shifted, watching me closely. I kept my composure. Innocent dinners don't involve poisoned wine and falsified contracts. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the courtroom. The attorney scowled. He tried again. "And Eleanor, this housekeeper, she had grievances, didn't she? Long hours, little pay. Isn't it possible she fabricated her testimony out of resentment?" I leaned forward slightly. "She risked everything by speaking up. If resentment was her motive, she could have walked away years ago. She stayed, and then she told the truth." The attorney's smile faltered. He shuffled papers, muttered something about inconsistencies, but the damage was done. When I stepped down from the stand, my pulse hammered, but my steps were steady. Lisa gave me a small nod of approval as I passed. Eleanor followed later, her testimony unwavering. She described the instructions Penelope gave her, the threats, the conversations she overheard. Her voice cracked only once when she said, "I couldn't watch them kill her." The prosecution rested their case with the physical evidence, the wine glass, the toxicology report, the signed drafts of fraudulent documents. The jury had stacks of proof, each one heavier than the last. The defense tried to salvage what they could, parading character witnesses, neighbors who said Arthur was a kind man, or friends who claimed Penelope was charming. But charm doesn't erase poison, and kindness doesn't erase conspiracy. As the trial stretched into days, the tension in the room thickened. Reporters scribbled frantically, headlines speculating about betrayal, greed, and a family unraveling. The phrase, "family revenge," showed up more than once in the coverage. When closing arguments arrived, Lisa's words cut sharp and clean. This was not a misunderstanding. It was not a mistake. It was a calculated attempt to destroy a daughter for profit. Arthur and Penelope Covington saw Captain Ava Covington not as family, but as currency, and they tried to cash her in. The defense sputtered their final rebuttals, but the jury had already heard enough. As I sat in the gallery watching Arthur stare at the table and Penelope glare at the jury, I realized something. Justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about truth, and truth was finally on record. The judge dismissed the jury for deliberations. Hours passed, long enough for everyone's nerves to fray. I sat with Eleanor in the hallway, the buzz of reporters surrounding us, the vending machines humming in the background. Finally, the bailiff called us back in. The jury filed into their seats, faces solemn. The foreman stood, with the jury, find the defendants. The air seemed to freeze. Guilty on all counts. The words landed like a hammer, final and unshakable. Arthur flinched in his chair, his head sinking lower, while Penelope froze, her painted smile finally cracking into something raw and twisted. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Arthur was let out first. He didn't look at me. He didn't even try. His shoulders sagged, his wrists cuffed, his face pale under the fluorescent lights. For a moment, I wondered if he felt relief. At least now the debt collectors couldn't get him. At least now Penelope couldn't push him any further. But whatever flicker of pity I might have felt was buried under the weight of betrayal. Penelope went next, her heels clicking furiously against the floor until the deputy shoved her forward. She tried to turn once, her eyes meeting mine, sharp as broken glass. No words, just a stare full of venom. And then she was gone, swallowed by the same steel doors. The courtroom emptied slowly, leaving me and Eleanor behind. She gripped her purse with trembling hands, her eyes wide as though she still couldn't believe it. "It's done?" I said quietly. She nodded, but her lips pressed tight, the weight of years of silence heavy on her. "I never thought I'd see the day," she whispered. Outside the courthouse, the sun hit bright and sharp, cameras flashing, reporters calling out questions. I pushed through the chaos, ignoring the microphones shoved toward my face. They shouted words like revenge, betrayal, scandal. None of them captured the truth. None of them knew what it felt like to stand in a courtroom and watch your own father sentenced for trying to erase you. Eleanor stayed close, her frame small against the storm of reporters. I guided her through the crowd, shielding her until we made it to the quiet of the parking lot. Only then did she exhale, shaky and long. "You hungry?" I asked suddenly. The words surprised both of us. She blinked, then let out a short laugh. "After all that? Yeah, I could eat." We ended up at a small diner off Route 50, the kind with cracked leather booths and waitresses who called you on. The clatter of dishes, the smell of fried bacon, the hum of old ceiling fans. It was almost comforting, almost normal. Eleanor stirred her coffee, staring at the steam. "What happens now, Captain?" The title again. It clung to me outside the base, outside the army, like it was the only identity that hadn't been tainted. "Now," I said, leaning back against the booth. "Now I figure out what family actually means." Her eyes flicked up to mine, soft and unsure. "And what do you think it means?" I thought about Arthur, about Penelope, about the poison swirling in that glass. I thought about the jury, about the judge, about all the strangers who now knew more about my family than most neighbors ever had. And then I looked at Eleanor, the woman who had risked everything to tell the truth. "It's not blood?" I said finally. "Blood didn't save me. Loyalty did. Courage did." Her lips trembled, her eyes wet. She shook her head. "I just did what anyone should have done." "No," I said firmly. "Plenty of people would have looked the other way. You didn't. That makes you family." The waitress arrived with pancakes and eggs, breaking the moment. We ate quietly, the clink of forks filling the silence. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something close to peace. After breakfast, I drove Eleanor back to the house, though neither of us called it home anymore. She packed her things quickly. Clothes, a few books, old letters tucked in a shoebox. I carried the heavier bags to the trunk of her car. She stood in the driveway, staring at the mansion she had worked in for decades, and shook her head. "Funny, isn't it?" she said. "All that money, all that space, and not an ounce of love inside." "Then leave it," I told her. "Take the freedom instead." She smiled faintly, and for once it reached her eyes. I didn't stay long either. I collected my duffel bag, my uniform, the few keepsakes worth holding on to, and locked the door behind me. Arthur's house, Penelope's stage, no longer had a place in my life. That night, back in my apartment near Fort Belvoir, the silence felt different. Not heavy like before. Not empty either, just calm. Eleanor called to say she'd found a small rental nearby. Nothing fancy, but hers. She sounded lighter, her laugh easier. And in that laugh, I realized something important. We weren't just survivors. We were building something new, The army had taught me about loyalty, about sacrifice, about standing your ground. But family, real family, wasn't in the bloodline. It was in the choices people made when everything was on the line. Arthur had chosen betrayal. Penelope had chosen greed. Eleanor had chosen truth. And me, I chose to live. Not just survive, but live. Weeks later, when the reporters finally grew bored and the courthouse emptied of our scandal, life began to feel normal again. I trained with my unit, laughed with fellow soldiers, and visited Eleanor on weekends. She made sweet tea. I fixed her leaky faucet. Ordinary things, simple things. One evening, as we sat on her porch watching the sun dip behind the trees, she turned to me and asked, "Do you ever regret coming back that night? Taking his invitation?" I thought about it. About the poison, the lies, the trial, about Arthur's hollow eyes in the courtroom. And then I shook my head. "No," I said, "because if I hadn't, I'd never have seen the truth, and I'd never have known who my real family is." She smiled softly, and for once the air between us felt warm. The scars remained, sure. Betrayal doesn't vanish, it lingers. But scars aren't weakness, they're proof of survival. And survival, when paired with truth, becomes strength. As I sat there, listening to the crickets and sipping Eleanor's too sweet tea, I knew the message was simple enough to carry forward. Family isn't always who you're born to. Sometimes it's who stands with you when everyone else walks away. And that's the truth I'd take with me into the army, into life, into every step that came next. My dear friends, the most valuable lesson we can learn is that our true family isn't found in a last name, but in a selfless act. It's in the quiet bravery of a person who sees a moment of injustice and chooses to speak. It's in the bonds we forge not through blood, but through unshakable loyalty and unwavering love. So I ask you today, who in your life has chosen to stand by you, without question or condition? Cherish those connections. They are your true legacy. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing. Together, we can build a community rooted in truth and courage.